Hey guys, what's up? Let's have a conversation about reprint equity. When WotC releases a new card, let's say a mechanically unique card that they have never printed before, and it's something that's desirable and people want it a lot. I think Ragavan would be a good example of this. Ragavan. So when they released Ragavan, I think in Modern Horizons 2 is where he first came about. It basically immediately became a staple of the modern format. And if you were playing with red, you probably wanted to have four copies, and so you needed to go spend about $300 to get them. And so immediately, Ragavan had very high total market equity. We might think of this like the market cap for any given card. And so you would lump together, if it's a card that's been reprinted a bunch of times since they are mechanically interchangeable, you would add up the total value of all the copies of the card in existence, and you'd say that's what their market cap is. And when it gets high enough, WotC starts to salivate, and they start to think, we can literally just print money. We can just print more copies of Ragavan because all the copies out there are worth about $80 each back at that point in time. And so then they reprinted, didn't they put it in like a showcase slot or something in Dominaria United, I think? Something like that, or they put them on the list, or I forget exactly where, but they started reprinting them, and maybe they've done it a couple times since then. Because WotC understands, hey, when the players want that card a ton, we can translate some of that desire into a desire to buy this sealed product that may potentially contain that card. Because if you're a store and you break sealed product to sell singles to your walk-ins or on TCG Player, you don't really care that, yeah, this might yield a Ragavan. What you care is that the box on average will yield so many dollars, and it will do that because it also could contain Ragavan. Understand? So the reprint equity is what WotC is looking to capture when it reprints a card. Now, I know people think that this is the end of the world for Magic, and you can go out and you can search, and something about how there just aren't a bunch of $100 cards left. WotC has reprinted everything and sucked up so much reprint equity. And something to keep in mind with markets is that any position in a market, any viewpoint on a market, any opinion on a market, often has an opposite side, and sometimes it's kind of logically challenging to understand what that opposite side is. And in the case of reprint equity and WotC using reprints to drain the equity out of people's collections and suck up the secondary market value, the opposite side of that is that markets also rebuild equity. And it's somewhat invisible, and that's why it's difficult to imagine it. When somebody takes a card and they stick it in a binder because it's part of a collection. And yes, binder collecting is still alive. I get messages from people on a regular basis who do it. I get orders from people on TCG Player when it's 60 singles all from one set, and I do some binder collecting myself. So yes, it's still alive and well. But when someone takes a Ragavan and they throw it in a binder because for some reason they want it as part of their personal collection for the long term, well, you've just taken that card out of what in the stock market we would call the float. And in stock market, the float is a rough estimate of all the shares that are available for trading. Now, we might start at what's the total amount of shares that a company has issued, and we would subtract all the shares that through SEC filings we know are held by, say, company insiders, by large hedge funds who traditionally don't have short-term stakes in companies, by things like pension funds that don't do a lot of trading, they buy and hold. Things like that will subtract from the float, and what's left is the float. It's the amount of shares that are available for trading, and it's a useful metric sometimes for, especially when you're getting into things like total days of volume to cover all the short positions and stuff like that. It's helpful to know the float. And so when a Ragavan gets stuck in a binder, it's no longer part of the float of Ragavans. And likewise, when one gets stuck into a commander deck, or even modern decks, maybe Ragavan will remain enough of a modern staple that all those Ragavans that got stuck in the modern decks, they'll just get kind of evolved forward into other modern decks for years to come, and they'll stay out of the float. And then occasionally some cards actually get destroyed or lost in a house fire or something like that. Or they get put into the display case at a store, and They're just not going to move because they're priced too high. And so there's a lot of those cards that come out of the float over time. And when that happens, it raises the price. Basically, it's like you had fewer shares of a company as available in the float. And so the money that wants to chase those shares are chasing fewer shares. So you have money chasing fewer copies of the card. And so as those copies of the card get locked away, they get put in binders, they get put in decks, they get put in BCW storage boxes and just stuck in someone's closet, and the person quits playing Magic, but they don't want to liquidate their collection because they either think they'll come back to it in the future or they're just not interested in the money. Those are cards that are removed from circulation, and all of those have the effect of rebuilding the secondary market equity for those cards. And on the medium to long term timelines, the markets can rebuild that equity. And I know that's something that a lot of people don't want to hear right now because WotC has been making bad choices. They've been reprinting way too much, reprinting too many heavy hitter old cards, reprinting them in too great a quantities, just everything for the last couple of years. And WotC has done a great job of sucking secondary market equity out of the market and into their pockets. But we know that can't go on forever. We know that it's doing a lot of damage to Magic. It's doing a lot of damage to card stores. And even WotC has to acknowledge that, yes, Magic will not exist without card stores. If WotC puts enough card stores out of business over a long enough period of time and makes it so exceptionally hard to successfully and profitably run a card store, eventually they could engineer the death of Magic. It would take a long time and a lot of effort, but that is one of the ways that Magic could actually one day die. And so WotC will at some point have to rethink how they handle secondary market equity, how they handle the value of people's collections, and that they can't just forever suck all the secondary market equity out and into their pockets. And that they have to leave some for people with collections. Otherwise, those people go away. If people think they're going to buy expensive cardboard and it's all going to be worthless immediately, that's going to turn off a lot of people. And yes, there are people who are here to play the game, to collect the cards, to enjoy looking at the squares of cardboard. But everybody, to some extent, wants to know that what they're buying will have some value afterwards. It's not all just about game pieces. And so WotC will have to change course on that eventually. And when they do, and to the extent that they do, that secondary market equity will begin to rebuild because cards will get locked away in decks, cards will get locked away in binders, they'll get locked away in storage closets, they'll get occasionally and rarely lost or destroyed. And so the secondary market equity will come back. And, we kind of exist in this very long and hard bear market for TCGs in particular, for Magic in particular, because of WotC's dumb choices. But humans are exceptionally poorly wired to be investors, and one of the manifestations of that is the straight line fallacy, where humans will look at the value of an asset, and if they see that it's gone down for the last month, for the last 6 months, God help us, for the last year, then they will just assume, well, it's going to go down forever until it's zero. And it's very hard for a lot of amateur investors to imagine anything else happening. It's hard for them to imagine that, yes, prices can go down. They can go down for a protracted period. They can stay irrationally low for a long time. But that changes other people's behaviors. And when a price comes down enough, people start looking at those prices and they start salivating and they start saying, that is just too cheap. The downside potential has been reduced so much that the upside opportunity far outweighs it, and the risk is in net beneficial. And that's why the straight line fallacy is a fallacy, because eventually something drops enough that people's behavior changes and the prices start to come back up. And that will happen too with secondary market value of single cards. They will come back eventually. WotC will take a different stance towards reprinting and trying to extract secondary market value. And we should expect that they will always try to extract some. They should try to extract some. We shouldn't expect them not to. And from the kind of game pieces argument point, yes, people want them to do reprints. There are a lot of staple cards that regularly need reprints, and the reason they need reprints is because copies of those cards get locked up in decks. I have about 20 or more pre-modern Magic decks. I know there are people out there with that many or 2 or 3 times as many Commander decks. And so the number of high value cards that are locked away in decks and people don't feel like taking them apart, they want to be able to play them when they want to, the cards get locked away and they stay there. And that rebuilds the secondary market equity over time. And WotC will eventually have to have a healthy relationship with that and collectors and players and maybe even investors too. Over the long period of time, they'll have to figure out what level of secondary market extraction is sustainable. The path they've been on since 2021 is not really sustainable, and we're starting to see the effects of that, more card stores going out of business. And to the extent that we have rumors now that WotC is making changes behind the scenes, I have no reason to doubt that. I mean, they'd have to be idiots not to be making some changes. The only downside to it is they're a big company, they take a long time to move, and they have a very long lead time on new expansions. And so for those changes to actually hit the market, to come to market, is going to still be 3, 6, 9, 12 months for those kind of changes. Mark Rosewater announced the new play boosters, but he says it's going to be, 6, 8 months before we actually see them. And they've been working on engineering play boosters for years before that. So things take a long time. There's a very long lag on WotC making a decision and that decision actually having an opportunity to start affecting the market. And beyond that, it will take time for the market to digest those changes, to understand how they affect things, for that to change cash flows at businesses, to change attitudes among buyers, to bring more buyers back off the sidelines, to potentially bring former players back to the game. And all of those things will have a lag on actually helping card stores. So I think any changes that we see out of WotC in 2024, well, it's still going to be a really rough year for card stores. I think a lot more card stores are going to go out of business in 2024. It's going to continue. It's going to take time before those kind of changes start to actually beneficially help card stores that survive. I think by 2025, yeah, we may be seeing a decent time depending on what WotC actually decides to do. Now, if they decide that they should still be allowed to just suck up every bit of secondary market value, well, Magic's going to have a rough couple more years before they're hit over the head hard enough by reality to second guess that decision and change things. But one day they will have to change. They won't just drive Magic into the ground. That itself is the straight line fallacy. It's seen that WotC has acted irresponsibly for the last couple years and just blindly imagining, unimaginatively, that they'll keep doing it forever until there's nothing left and Magic is destroyed. And it's a straight line fallacy, and you have to make sure that you can catch yourself if you're doing that and then figure out what the opposite case is. The opposite case is they've made changes already, they're going to make more, and as those changes actually roll out and start to have an effect on the markets, markets will rebuild their equity. Card values will come back. Classic cards, old cards, cards from the 90s, reserve lists, classic staples, things like unlimited and revised copies of Demonic Tutor, those are timeless pieces, and they will always come back in price. So it's going to take some time, but markets reward patience. I think markets reward patience better than anything else, and patience is the thing that we can all have. We can't all be genius hedge fund managers who predict the dot-com bust or predict the great financial crisis or the housing bust or anything like that. Very few people are able to make those kind of calls and have the conviction to act on them and have access to enough capital to really make a big impact on markets with those kind of predictions. But one thing all of us can do is just be patient. And I've said it many times on this channel, I'm not good at this, I'm not smart, I'm just patient. I'm patient, I'm willing to buy a great asset at a good price and sit on it for a long time. Because what we've seen over the last 25 years is cardboard gets ever more popular. Even as other things competing for our attention come and go, cardboard remains popular. And as populations keep increasing, it's probably only going to become more popular. We've had 25 years of the internet, of home consoles, of streaming services, the rise and fall of MMOs, smartphones, every type and more of cheaper and more available and more effective entertainment mediums put in front of us, and yet cardboard has remained popular. Baseball cards have remained popular for 140 years now. You can buy baseball cards going back to 1887 at least. 140 years baseball cards have been popular, and you can't even play with them. All you can do is collect them and look at them. So there's no reason for me to think that any of that's going to change in my lifetime. So be patient, cast a wide thin net, buy a little bit of everything, put it back in the closet, and in the long term, I think you'll do really well. That's basically the only thing I claim to be good at, is being patient. Let me know what you think, guys. This is kind of an amalgamation from several conversations I had with different patrons. Black Friday is coming up this Friday. Use the Final Trade TCG code down below in the description. I appreciate that a lot. I'm going to have a lot of stuff coming this week, even over here on YouTube. Tons more stuff for my patrons over on Patreon for Black Friday, getting ready for it. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be a lot of great assets at really good prices. Let me know what you think, everybody. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade. Join the Patreon.